Hello, I am Professor Kino, and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we will be talking about The Invisible Man is a classic. He originated back in 1897 with H.G. Wells' sci-fi novel about an optical scientist Griffin who discovers how to turn invisible by altering his body's refractive index to match the air around him. However, after he fails to reverse the procedure and it drives him mad, he decides to use his newfound trait to harass the nation and begin a reign of terror. Violence and chaos ensues, as it always does in these sorts of stories, until he is defeated, of course. But not without an aura of uncertainty. It's classic. But back in its day, The Invisible Man was unprecedented, influential, and helped to secure Wells the title of Father of Science Fiction. In fact, the book became so impactful and memorable that the character of the Invisible Man has since been adapted into various other mediums, such as books and movies and shows and comics, countless times over the past 123 years. Most notably, of course, in 1933's Universal film adaptation of the story, which, due to its positive reception, became one of the studio's classic monster movies, in the vein of its predecessors, i.e. 1923's Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1925's The Phantom of the Opera, 1931's Dracula and Frankenstein, and 1932's The Mummy. And this film and its popularity, in conjunction with Wells' initial story, helped to solidify the Invisible Man into pop culture. And since then, the character has been reinterpreted many different ways, sometimes with a simple literal adaptation of the story, sometimes with the character of Griffin being placed into a different story, and sometimes with just the character's concept, i.e. a man who is permanently invisible. But the fact of the matter is that his influence is everywhere, from horror films such as Hollow Man, to family films such as the Hotel Transylvania series, to superhero flicks like Mystery Men, to comic books and their own film adaptations like The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. But amidst all of these interpretations, among the good and the bad, the Invisible Man is best used and most memorable when his powers and concept capture the zeitgeist of whatever time period the specific adaptation comes out in. And this is what the 2020 film, simply titled The Invisible Man once again, was aiming for. Think modern Hollywood in its post-Weinstein sexual assault/Me Too era, which, if you haven't watched my previous reviews, is quite the common theme in cinema this year. But this wasn't always intended, and the journey of this project from conception to creation is quite a fascinating one, so before we delve into the review, let's break down the film's background. It's been a long time since Universal has really been able to capitalize on the characters that defined it during the early days of Hollywood, the classic Universal monsters. But this isn't for a lack of trying. Every few years it seems as though Universal tries, and promptly fails, to ignite the spark that used to guarantee financial and critical success back in the 1920s through the 1950s. To see these attempts in recent years, look toward 2010's The Wolfman or 2014's Dracula Untold, or, and this is the most embarrassing for the studio, 2017's The Mummy, which was supposed to be the first in a series of remakes that were intended to unite all the classic Universal monsters into one cinematic universe. The Dark Universe. It was a concept that Universal put so much faith into that the studio cast A-listers to headline it, such as Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll, Sofia Boutella as the Mummy, Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster, Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man, and Tom Cruise as the Dark Universe hero Nick Morton. And all of these announcements and decisions were made before the first film in the franchise even came out, mind you. But Universal was determined to start a collective universe of its own in the vein of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to tap into that sweet, sweet franchise money. But when The Mummy was released, it was almost universally derided by critics and audience members, and made nowhere close to what the studio had hoped it would, i.e. only about $400 million on a $125 million budget, or more like $250 million budget if you count advertising, of which there was a lot of. Promptly, The Dark Universe was canned in October 2017, just 5 months after The Mummy came out, under the pretense that Universal didn't want to rush any films and just wanted to release them when they felt ready. Sounds like fancy words to say, it's cancelled to me. So at this point, it was assumed that any attempt to remake one of the classic monster movies was kaput. At least until prolific horror studio Blumhouse announced that it was making an adaptation of The Invisible Man, interestingly without Johnny Depp, as had been announced by Universal a few years prior. Instead, this would be a remake without any supposed connection to the aforementioned Dark Universe. It was just going to be a standalone film that brought the classic character into modern day under the direction of a newer but reputable sci-fi horror filmmaker, Leigh Whannell, think Saw and Upgrade. He took the task of adapting the character into modern day to heart, and he did just that by focusing in on modern day Weinstein stuff by making this a reimagining all about abuse and assault. And while the film didn't get the greatest trailers, I was still excited for it, due to the fact that I have enjoyed Whannell's previous work. Upgrade was even one of my top 10 films of 2018, and because I was curious to see how this latest attempt to reinvigorate a classic Universal monster would end up. So do I think that this iteration has finally cracked the code of remaking one of these classic Universal films, or is it destined to be forgotten and become invisible like all of the previous attempts to accomplish this? Premise. After escaping an abusive relationship with rich optics engineer/scientist Adrian Griffin, Cecilia Cass finally starts to reclaim her life in spite of the trauma that he had caused her. However, after she learns of Griffin's sudden though uncharacteristic suicide, and that through this she has been bequeathed a substantial portion of Griffin's fortune, she uses the newfound knowledge and money as a means to restart her life, break away from Griffin's psychological influence, and feel safe and alive once again. But after some strange and unsettling occurrences over the next few days/weeks, she quickly becomes convinced that she is being tormented by an unseen force. And after this torment becomes more and more personal, and after she makes some disturbing discoveries, Cecilia comes to the conclusion that Adrian is in fact alive and well, and has, by discovering a way to become invisible, faked his own death in order to exact his revenge on her for leaving him. This reimagining of the Invisible Man is inspired in that it captures the essence of what an abusive relationship is to a T. To anyone looking at this film from the outside, that may seem like more praise than it is worth, and fair enough, the trailers for it were nothing more than fine, but let me just say that they did not sell the film well. If you just look at what the trailers showed and believed understandably that it was just a surface-level movie about a guy harassing his ex in ways such as photographing her while she's sleeping, or watching her in the shower, or sneaking up behind her and just being all creepy, then I'd understand why you'd be skeptical. While all of that imagery is definitely creepy, it does seem basic. But there is so much more to the Invisible Man than just creepy imagery, so much that is subtle, and because of that, so much that works. And a lot of it is, understandably, difficult to showcase in a trailer. It's a slow burn, so yeah, it makes sense to advertise with the flashier scenes, but to be honest, they are few and far between. A lot of what makes this film work are the small moments, and the way that it tackles the plethora of difficult aspects of an abusive relationship masterfully, seamlessly, and with such finesse that it makes you think, why has no one imagined the Invisible Man like this before? It's just so perfect. And to be fair, there have been some previous iterations that have tackled him using his powers to abuse and assault women. In the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic, for example, he raped a lot of mentally ill women in a correctional facility under the pretense that he was the quote-unquote Holy Spirit, and that all of the pregnancies that ensued were immaculate conceptions, which is pretty fucked up, but it is still an interpretation that relies on surface-level shock value above all else. In this iteration of The Invisible Man, the way that it tackles abuse and assault has a lot more finesse to it, and it makes it feel all the more realistic, and because of that, horrifying. It honestly does capture the true essence of an abusive relationship, and to best showcase how it does this, I want to talk about two things in particular: the acting/characters, and the multitude of subgenres that the film effortlessly blends together to drive home its core theme. So let's talk about acting first. While the acting is stellar across the board, including some great supporting acting from Aldis, Hodge, Harriet, Dyer, Reid, and Michael Dorman, the two leads are where the film shines. Elisabeth Moss is the perfect everywoman as Cecilia Cass. While there wasn't too much to her character besides the fact that she is a middle-class woman who has gone through an abusive relationship, Moss made her feel real. Her reactions, her expressions, her line delivery, they felt natural, and this was all heightened by a wardrobe and makeup style that made her look like an everyday woman, not all dolled up. Her imperfections are present and prominent. When she's losing it, she looks like a mess. Her hair is rarely perfect unless she specifically styles it in the movie. Simply put, Moss does a wonderful job at making Cecilia a character that any woman, or even person, can see themselves as, a fact that is made even easier by the unfortunate fact that many people have experienced an abusive or toxic relationship at some point in their lives. And because of all this, Moss brings us, the audience, into the film and is able to make us invested in what is going on, because through Moss's performance, we feel and understand Cecilia as a character, because she is us. And providing some great complementary acting to this is Oliver Jackson Cohen as Cecilia's abusive ex, Adrian Griffin. He may not have as much screen time, but he steals what he does have. Not only is he immediately able to make Griffin feel like a threat, but he does so without sacrificing any depth. Griffin is a complex character that exudes the typical qualities of an abusive lover marvelously. He is never obviously abusive, he never openly hits Cecilia or attacks her emotions. In fact, he is often seen as somewhat loving to her when he is on screen, but he is manipulative, and it's seen in the subtleties. For instance, while his words can be seen as on the surface kind pleasantries, his facial expressions and exact word choices always come off as haunting, as though he is analyzing Cecilia and trying his hardest to make her doubt herself and lose her sense of self, to make what she knows feel invalid and maybe wrong. Jackson Cohen does such a good job of this that he even made me question whether or not he was everything Cecilia said he is/was. He is the perfect cinematic interpretation of an abusive lover, and with that, he is a phenomenal reimagining of the classic H.G. Wells character. And then this spectacular acting is bolstered by the way the film presents itself. The Invisible Man mixes and matches 3 specific subgenres throughout its entire runtime, except they all work marvelously together because they all build on top of each other to fully drive home the core theme of abusive relationships. And these 3 subgenres are ghost, home invasion, and monster. First, ghosts. In a typical ghost story, the scares are subtle and often directed towards one character in particular. The spooks start off innocent enough, but as the tale progresses, strange activities become more and more prominent to the point that the main character seeks help. They are often lost and confused and scared, looking for answers to explain what they don't understand. And then this confusion is made even worse by people around them telling them they are seeing things and that there is nothing really there. All of this is similar to an abusive relationship in many ways. The victim is typically the only one who sees the abuse. It is often subtle to the point that the victim starts to feel confused, and when they start seeking help, people have a tendency to shut them down and or discount their feelings and experiences because outsiders do not see what is really going on. And all of this is featured in The Invisible Man. In the beginning of the film, small things happen to Cecilia. Something moves or gets misplaced, the stove flame is turned up a little more, a door is left ajar, that sort of thing. Nothing that immediately makes Cecilia panic, but it puts her on edge. And as the activities start happening more frequently, she begins to act out a little more as she begins to suspect that something is wrong. Except everything going on is directed at her and her alone, so everyone around her only gets concerned about her mental health. And many of them discount her suspicions, and even go so far as to call her crazy. So using all of these elements in this film works wonders for the theme. It starts to propose the question, is everything really going on, or is it all in Cecilia's head? Maybe she is crazy. But that doesn't matter, because even if it is all in her head, it just shows the extent of the damage caused by abusive relationships. The usage of ghost story elements in this film brings out the truth that for most, after they escape an abusive relationship, they are not free. The trauma that the abuse caused stays with them like a shadow, a ghost. So seeing Cecilia suffering from some unseen force singling her out is characteristic of the aftermath of an abusive relationship. The abuse has lasting damage, and personifying that in this film as an invisible entity is brilliant. As for the next subgenre, the home invasion film. In a home invasion story, the victims are usually put under siege by some outside group or creature or enemy who seeks to cause pain and suffering and chaos, think The Purge or Home Alone even. But The Invisible Man puts a twist on this subgenre by making the invader invisible and someone that the main character knows. It makes it so that no room or space feels safe, like the invader could be anywhere. It makes home feel like a prison. And to take this idea further, this sensation of being trapped is felt even when Cecilia is in her and Griffin's home. And this brings forth the fact that in an abusive relationship, the victim would feel unsafe and under siege even in their own house or room because the invader is under the same roof all the time because it is their home as well. It sounds strangely contradictory, but the feeling of being trapped in one's own home is characteristic of an abusive relationship, and this film uses the classic cinematic subgenre of home invasion and the tropes that come with it to showcase that fact with an admirable brilliance. And finally, the monster subgenre. There are a lot of ways a monster film can play out, but by and large it features some creature with some strange unnatural power who stalks our protagonist with the intent to kill or harm them. Think most classic killers, Jason or Freddy, or beasts, xenomorphs or Predator, and the Invisible Man has a lot of similarities to all of these. He's determined and intelligent and malicious. He's abusive. He is a monster. A fact made even more clear by the presentation of Griffin in his invisibility suit. It has quite the horrific design to it, a multitude of cameras that look like inhuman eyes observing everything. It's honestly horrifying and captures Griffin's unsettling act of analyzing people with his eyes all the more prominent. The reasoning for the inclusion of this subgenre in the film is pretty clear. Griffin has one intent, to stalk and harm Cecilia, and he uses a supernatural power to do so. He is a monster, an abuser, and once you combine all 3 of these subgenres and play them out back to back, or even simultaneously, the result is a perfect encapsulation of an abusive relationship, its characteristics, and the impact it can have on a victim. And it is so well done that it honestly boggles the mind. To top it all off, the film also features some creative camera work, specifically during the action scenes, much in the vein of Whannell's previous film Upgrade, some atmospheric sets, and plenty of legitimately unexpected twists. And the final result is one of the best movies to have come out this year so far, and definitely the best remake of one of Universal's classic monster movies that has ever been done, because it feels so timely and, given its theme, important. Not everyone knows what an abusive relationship can really be like. It's not always loud, bombastic verbal abuse and hitting. Most of the time it is tenacious and insidious and unseen by the outside world. It is confusion and uncertainty and stress and anxiety and trauma. And I am in awe of how well Leigh, Whannell and company capture that reality in one brilliantly crafted film. A film that feels like each and every piece of it was meticulously picked and planned and implemented to make it all as seamless and powerful as possible. The Invisible Man truly is inspired from beginning to end. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to add anything, feel free to leave a comment. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Until next time, I'm Professor Kino, and I look forward to our future discussions.